The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. I got a comment on my video about I don't look autistic or you don't look autistic from Miss Treebird. She says, would love to hear suggestions for coping strategies, especially age appropriate to teens, and how to recall parentheses self-calm / regulate at crisis if you would be so kind. So thank you, Ms. Treebird, for that suggestion. I actually would like to do videos on this. Being someone who has a child with Aspergers and someone who grew up with Aspergers myself, I know something about this. And I could probably do a few videos, even just based on what you asked me. First of all, that's a question that comes up a lot. How do you deal with the person with Aspergers? Or it could be, whoever, but let's just say, I'm talking mostly about this here. How do you deal with your child or teen or whoever with Aspergers when they're in crisis? I think because it's only when they're in crisis that everyone else realizes that there's a problem. It gets so big that everyone else around them is suddenly like, well, we got to deal with this because their behavior is out of control. They're not coping. But the fact is, they're dealing with stuff all the time. You just may not realize what they're dealing with. And I think the key is to avoid getting to the crisis, because it doesn't just come out of nowhere like that. There's always stuff leading up to it. There's always triggers. Not to say that you're going to be able to avoid that all the time, but if you start looking at it more as staying one step ahead of that, to understanding where it's difficult for them to cope or what sets it off, I think that's solving at least half the problem. So as for dealing with crisis, when the person is really, really in crisis, like as in a meltdown, at this point they've basically lost their executive function. I talked about this a bit in the video I did about living with sensory processing disorder. At this point, it's not a discipline issue. They're not doing it for attention. At this point, you feel like you've had a short circuit in your brain, like things are not connecting, you're not able to speak properly or to communicate well. Everything sort of goes out the window. You can't think, you can't make decisions. It's at that point, it's really a brain problem, and basically you want to avoid going there. Okay, so this is not the time to be like, clamping down heavily and treating it like a discipline issue. I think it's a time to give a person a little bit of space when it starts to go there. As long as they're not hurting themselves, they're not, breaking anything, just let them blow off steam. Just let them work it out. That's my opinion. Less words. When people get to that point, like I say, there's a problem with executive function, and it'll affect your ability to communicate, to verbalize, and to process information. This is the worst time to start lecturing somebody or trying to even reason with them, because I believe, and I'm not a doctor, but I am someone who has lived with this, and I am someone who has a child with this type of problem. And I believe that, at this point, the executive function is really at a low. As a child, when your executive function is that far gone, and your ability to process and to verbalize is so low, and people think that, they need to just reason with you. But the more words are coming at you, the more it's actually adding to your stress and your anxiety, because it's really giving you more to process. I mean, it's more input, and in that state, it's more difficult to process this input. So, somebody like saying a whole bunch of stuff to you, it's going to just make it so much worse. So, although you might feel like you're making sense, you're reasoning, and you're going to help this person by trying to reason with them, that's probably not going to help. In my experience, the less words, the better. Okay, one key thing also to dealing with this when it's happening, or preferably before, is to remove the triggers. And I guess as a parent, your job is to know the triggers and to keep an eye on them and to see, what's coming, and to gauge, when it's going to be time to pull out. I mean, people with Asperger's, sensory processing problems and stuff like that, ADHD also, executive function disorder, they can't tolerate as much. So what might seem like something that might just get typical kids are like really excited or whatever, it might be a little bit of bad behavior. With someone with this kind of problem, it could just go right over the edge. So it's your job to keep tabs on things like hunger, fatigue, overstimulation, too much noise, too much social interaction, and to also teach the person to keep tabs on this themselves. Because when they're young, they may not realize what's happening at all. And you know, they might just go into wherever, let's just say a mall, and their brain is starting to like fall apart. But they might not be realizing exactly what's happening. They might not even make the connection that it's because they're in the mall. I mean, if it's like they have a really sensitive ear, like I have super sensitive ears, so if I'm around a sound that is triggering my ear, I'll be like, oh, my ear, I have to get out. But on another level, you might be just so caught up in what you're doing, you might not realize you're getting overloaded. So it's kind of your job to see a bit what those triggers are with them, you know, figure it out, and to point out, okay, you haven't eaten this amount of time. Ask them, are you hungry? Because sometimes people with sensory processing or autistic disorders, they don't realize when they're hungry. They just know they feel like crap. You know, me included. You don't realize you're hungry, you're thirsty, maybe you have to go to the bathroom, you're tired, you know, whatever. And for some reason you just don't make that connection, and you just start feeling really edgy and bad. And other people might be like, oh, I'm really hungry, I need to get some food. And you might just not realize it. And never occur to you that that's what it is, and never think to ask somebody to help you with this. Or you know, you could be in some kind of discomfort. You just, it just might, for some reason, doesn't occur to you that solving that problem is going to make a difference, and that you can ask somebody to help you. I think because when you're under discomfort, your executive function gets lower, and so then you're not reasonable about finding a solution. So it's your job as a parent sort of help them to understand that, to figure out their triggers and know how to stay a step ahead of it. Okay, let's say it's getting to the point of like near meltdown, or like the pre-meltdown where you can see like something's not reasonable and the behavior's starting to change. Number one, remove the triggers. Whatever it is, you can deal with it later, most likely. I mean, sometimes you can't, but most of the time, you can take a few minutes to help them regulate, remove the trigger, bring them down, and then you can get back to dealing with the situation. Okay, once they've blown off some steam, or once they've had a little bit of a break and they've gotten themselves calm, now is the time to talk about the situation, to figure it out. And this is where I would really recommend using visuals. So hopefully this is helpful to you. Let me know what you think. Thanks for giving me a thumbs up. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time. Prevented from learning social skills naturally doesn't mean you can't learn social skills. If people believe that, I think it's